Welcome to our channel. Make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. Who is Alton Coleman and Debra Brown? Warning: the following contains images of graphic violence and not suitable for all audiences. Viewer discretion is advised. Alton Coleman, November 6, 1955 to April 26, 2002, was an American serial killer who, along with accomplice Debra Brown, born November 11, 1962, committed a crime spree across 6 states between May and July 1984 that resulted in the deaths of 8 people. Coleman, who received death sentences in 3 states, was executed by the state of Ohio in 2002. Brown was sentenced to death in Ohio and Indiana, but the sentences were later reduced to life imprisonment without parole and 140 years, respectively.
The pattern seems to be that while Coleman perpetrates acts of violence against almost anyone he comes in contact with.
Authorities believe Coleman began his spree of murder and rape at the end of May, when he allegedly abducted 2 little girls in Gary, Indiana. One just raped, the other he also murdered.
She had multiple contusions about her. She had a cord around her neck, and she had a footprint on her chest, and her right hand was tied with evidently a piece of her shirt.
The day after 7-year-old Tamika Turks was found in Gary, the body of another child, 9-year-old was found in Kenosha, Wisconsin. The 9-year-old was the daughter of a woman Coleman had become friends with. Coleman seems to have a special way of luring children into his death trap.
With candy, or frankfurters, or some similar inducement which would appeal to very young children.
He will go into neighborhoods in order to get whatever items he needs for survival. This is independent of his effort to obtain young black girls for his deviant purposes.
But Coleman is also suspected of killing adults. The body of 25-year-old evangelist Donna Williams was found in an abandoned Detroit building last week. She had been missing since June 19th, shortly after she met Coleman. On July 7th, a 30-year-old Toledo woman and her 10-year-old daughter were found dead in the crawlway of their home.
From what we've learned, that there's very little doubt, if any, that it is Coleman and Brown.
Coleman is thought to be traveling with Debra Brown, a former lover. But whether she is a willing accomplice or a captive is not clear.
It is a master-slave type relationship. She's been described as being willing to do anything that Alton Coleman tells her.
Criminal background: Alton Coleman. Alton Coleman was born on November 6, 1955, in Waukegan, Illinois. His mother worked 3 jobs, and he lived with his 73-year-old grandmother. Coleman was well known to Illinois law enforcement, having been charged with sex crimes 6 times between 1973 and 1983. 2 of those cases were dismissed, with Coleman pleading guilty to lesser charges in 2 and twice being acquitted. He was scheduled to go on trial in Illinois on charges stemming from the rape of a 14-year-old girl when he fled and began his killing spree. Coleman was diagnosed with mixed personality disorder with probable antisocial, narcissistic and obsessive features, with additional diagnoses including epileptic spasms, psychosis, and borderline personality disorder. Debra Brown. Debra Brown was born on November 11, 1962. She is one of 11 children, is borderline intellectually disabled, suffered head trauma as a child, and was diagnosed with dependent personality disorder by a psychiatrist. 4. She was engaged to another man when she met Coleman in 1983, but left her family and moved in with him shortly afterwards. Although a willing participant in Coleman's assaults and murders, Brown had no history of violence or any criminal history prior to their relationship. Murders: Wisconsin and Illinois. Coleman and Brown committed their first murder when they killed 9-year-old Vernita Wheat from Kenosha, Wisconsin. After Coleman had befriended her mother, Juanita Wheat, he abducted Vernita and took her to Waukegan on May 29, 1984. Vernita's badly decomposed body was discovered on June 19 in an abandoned building 4 blocks from the apartment of Coleman's grandmother. It was determined she had been raped, and the cause of death was ligature strangulation. On May 31, Coleman befriended Robert Carpenter in Waukegan and spent the night at his home. The next day, he borrowed Carpenter's car to go to the store and never returned. Indiana and Michigan. In June 1984, Coleman and Brown encountered 2 young girls in Gary, Indiana, 9-year-old Annie Turks and her niece, 7-year-old Tamika Turks. The couple sexually assaulted the 2 children. Annie survived the violent attack, but Tamika did not. Her partially decomposed body was discovered on June 19. The same day, Donna Williams, a 25-year-old woman from Gary, disappeared. On July 11, her decomposed body was discovered in Detroit, Michigan, about half a mile from where her car was found. She had been raped and killed by ligature strangulation. On June 28, Coleman and Brown entered the home of Mr. and Mrs. Palmer Jones of Dearborn Heights, Michigan, whom they beat severely. Coleman ripped the telephone from their wall before stealing money and their car. Ohio. On July 5, Coleman and Brown arrived in Toledo, Ohio, where Coleman befriended Virginia Temple, the mother of several children. When Temple stopped communicating with her relatives, authorities entered her home and found her young children alone and frightened. Temple and her eldest child, 9-year-old Rochelle, had been strangled to death and left in a crawl space. On the same morning as the Temple murders, Coleman and Brown entered the home of Frank and Dorothy Divendak in Toledo, who were bound with electrical cords which had been cut. The couple stole the Divendak's money and car, and Mrs. Divendak's stolen watch was later found under another victim. Later that day, Coleman and Brown visited the Dayton home of Reverend Millard Gay and his wife Catherine. The 2 stayed with the Gays and accompanied them to a religious service on July 9, where the next day the Gays dropped off the couple in downtown Cincinnati. Coleman and Brown bicycled into Norwood on July 13 at about 9:30 a.m. Less than 3 hours later, they drove away in a car belonging to Harry Walters, whom they left unconscious, and his wife Marlene, who was raped and beaten to death. Walter survived and later testified that they had met the couple to discuss their potential purchase of a camper, but that Coleman attacked him with a wooden candlestick. The coroner indicated Marlene had been bludgeoned approximately 20 to 25 times during her violent assault. Shards of a broken soda bottle which bore Coleman's fingerprints were found in the living room, and bloody footprints made by 2 different pairs of shoes were found in the basement. The Walters red Plymouth Reliant, as well as money, jewelry, and shoes, were stolen. 2 bicycles, clothes and shoes not belonging to the Walters had been left behind. Kentucky, returned to Ohio, Illinois, and Indiana. 2 days later, the Plymouth was found abandoned in Kentucky, where Coleman and Brown had kidnapped Oline Carmichael Jr., a college professor from Williamsburg, and drove back to Ohio with Carmichael locked in the trunk of his car. On July 17, they abandoned this stolen vehicle in Dayton, and Carmichael, who was still locked in the trunk, was rescued by authorities. Coleman and Brown returned to the home of the Gays, accosting them with guns. Reverend Gay, who at this time recognized Coleman as a wanted fugitive, asked, "Why you want to do us like that, like this?" Coleman responded, "I'm not going to kill you, but we generally kill them where we go." Coleman and Brown took their car and headed back toward Evanston, Illinois. Along the way, they stole another car in Indianapolis and killed its owner, 75-year-old Eugene Scott.
Harry and Marlene Walters, who were in their 40s, owned this camper for some time. They were trying to sell it. According to neighbors, sometime early this afternoon, a black man and woman had rode up to the house on bicycles. They acted like they wanted to buy the camper. Then, according to neighbors, Mr. Walters drove one or both of the suspects to a bank, possibly to withdraw money. They came back. The suspects then tied up the couple in the basement. Mrs. Walters was murdered, her husband beaten unconscious. The couple was found by their daughter, one of their 3 children. She then ran across the street to a close friend for help.
All I know is that they were tied up in the basement, and that she said she couldn't find the pulse of her mother's, and that her dad's was very weak. And a few minutes later, they carried the husband out on a stretcher, and they were running with him. And when I took one look at my good friend, I just went to pieces.
The suspects escaped in the family car. When police arrived, they found the house ransacked. They're not sure yet what, if anything, had been stolen, and the murder weapon has not yet been determined. Police say this is one of the safest and quietest neighborhoods in Norwood. It's made up mostly of middle-income families. Neighbors and close friends of the Walters are stunned. They can't believe that something like this could happen here.
They were just what you would consider very nice people. I don't think they really had any enemies.
They're very close to family. We're all very close. I can't see them. Around here especially.
I don't know what else to say about them other than I really can't believe it, and then I really loved them.
Norwood police were at work early this morning, sealing off the home of Harry and Marlene Walters at 4118 Floral Avenue. Inside the home, officials from the Alton County Coroner's Office began looking for what they called trace evidence. Fingerprints, footprints, things that might be missing from the home. Anything that might connect suspect Alton Coleman to the brutal murder of Marlene Walters and the attack on her husband, Harry.
Here at the Norwood Police Department, detectives met with FBI officials who came into Cincinnati just last night. It didn't take them long to determine that Alton Coleman might be the man they were looking for. As a matter of fact, he was their only suspect.
What they do say is that Coleman is a survivor, a man who uses people to get what he wants.
He has no way of getting next to it. He meets people on the street and can discuss religion. He can discuss politics. He's very forward, very well-spoken, very calm, and very deadly.
Authorities believe what Coleman wanted and needed was a getaway car. Perhaps it wasn't a coincidence when police arrived at the scene of the murder yesterday. The victim's car was gone, stolen. At this time, police have no idea whether Coleman is still in the area or if he's left town. But a nationwide bulletin has been put out on the vehicle he's believed to be driving.
The application of such current must be continued until you are dead. The timeliness of appeal will be filed on your behalf. You understand those rights, sir? The court has searched for some evidence of mitigating factors that would, in some small, legitimate way, cause one to find a plausible explanation for the defendant's inexcusable conduct. The court has found none.
You've just been sentenced to death twice. Don't you have anything to say? What's the problem you had with those transcripts? Anything to say at all?
Clear the doorway. Clear the door.
Relatives of Coleman's victims arrived by bus this morning to witness his execution.
He is continuing to be very calm and very compliant, cooperating in every way, not creating any problems whatsoever over at the death house.
Coleman spent his last hours visiting with spiritual advisors and his attorneys until the 8:45 cutoff time.
At which time he will be offered a shower, and then we will prepare him for the execution process.
The execution process began just before 10. A doctor gave Coleman a shot to sedate him, a second shot to slow his heart rate. He was then transferred from a holding cell 17 steps to the death chamber.
Mr. Coleman came in wearing a non-denominational, we're told, prayer shawl.
When he walked in, he seemed quite confident. It happened quite fast. And he seemed to kind of adjust his shawl and then did not need any kind of escorting onto the gurney.
Coleman made a last statement, but he didn't use his own words. Instead, he quoted the 23rd Psalms.
He repeated, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, and continued with that.
And then it seemed like his chest heaved. He took a couple quick breaths, maybe probably about 8 or 9, and then that's kind of when he just stopped. It was no big last breath.
The execution process for inmate Alton Coleman has been completed. The official time of death, 10:13.